I'll just begin the press conference. Thank you very much. Good morning. I'm Candis Mclean, the author of the book, and also the person who perpetrated an indiscretion. I had no intention of upsetting anyone with the timing of the launch of my book. It was supposed to be November the 12th that we launched the book. And that was the date of the firing of the two officers, Larry Hartwig, who is going to be here any minute now, and Brad Singer, who was the other officer targeted by the RCMP as having been involved in the freezing death of Neil Stonechild. Brad Singer, I'm informed, does not wish to be part of any informal process, but if there were to be a formal process at which he could be vindicated, he would be very happy to participate. So what happened was I was going to have the launch on November the 12th. We were working very hard to finish the book and get it printed. My publisher, Julie, is on the live stream here. And we were on target, but when I phoned the bookstore to have the launch on November the 12th, she said, "Oh dear, we're booked for that night." So, and she said the whole week is booked. So why don't you have it the following week when there were some vacancies available? And for those who are listening out of the city, you might not be aware, but November the 15th is when Jason Roy, the only witness to, the only person to ever claim to have been a witness to seeing Neil Stonechild in a police car, and he was having a feast on that November 15th because that marked the 25th anniversary of the freezing death of Neil Stonechild. I had asked for the 12th of November because that was when the officers were fired, with no charges ever laid against them because there was no evidence to ever lay any charges. But we couldn't get that date. Then we tried for the following week, and the event planner at the bookstore said, "I'm just concerned about you getting books here. They're still being printed, and we have to get them transported." So we looked at this week. And she said, "How far back in the week could you go?" And I said, "Well, I have a friend flying over from Europe to visit me this week, and she arrives on Thursday. I could fly back to Calgary on Thursday, so the latest I could do it is the 25th. Nobody knows when Neil Stonechild died. That's the sad thing. There's so little known about this case, and that is what I have been spending a decade researching, trying to find out what happened to Neil Stonechild and how did he get out to that field. And so little is known, including when he died. In my book, in the timeline, I write the last time that Neil was knowingly, last seen was November the 24th, and then the date his body was discovered in the field in the north end of Saskatoon was November the 29th. And am I right on that? Is it the 28th or the 29th?
27th, I thought.
Pardon me?
I thought it was the 27th.
No, I believe it was 5 days between the time he was last seen. It was thank you. I have it in the book. But anyway, I did not put in a date of death. The coroner, the pathologist who studied the case back in 1990, said he had to designate a date of death, so he designated November the 27th. But in any event, I feel very badly if I have offended anyone. I certainly had no intention to offend anyone. I had only the intention to reveal the many discoveries I've made. And in my opinion, this has been a huge travesty of justice, huge. And I'm appalled. I'm from Saskatchewan, and this is my home province. I still think of it as my home province, and to know that such a travesty could occur within a justice system and two hardworking, honest officers with exemplary records could possibly have been implicated in this freezing death. It's appalling. And I wanted to try to understand, because if two officers who chose to work in the Aboriginal community and had such good records could somehow have their lives ripped apart, and they had to go through the pits of purgatory for years and years, think what the justice system could do to you or I, who don't have that record of having chosen to work in the Aboriginal community, or have all the Aboriginal supporters and all the record of helping Aboriginal people. So that is what this book is about the two officers. And you know what's so interesting to me? The person who nailed the whole subject was Neil Stonechild's mother, Stella Bignell. And after the public inquiry, at which the hearing officer, the commissioner of inquiry, had assigned criminal and or civil responsibility for Neil's death, I spoke to Mrs. Bignell, and she said to me, you know, I wanted to find out how my boy got out to the North End, where he was found frozen to death. We still don't know. She had not said, oh, the officers are responsible. She didn't believe that at all. She said, we still don't know. And her concluding comment to me that I can still hear all these years later was, justice has not been served. And that is exactly the problem. After all the money that's been spent, millions of dollars, a 3-year RCMP investigation, inquests, a commissioner of inquiry, we still don't know. But what I do know for sure is that two good officers have been targeted and their lives have been ripped apart by these allegations that they had something to do with the freezing death of Neil Stonechild. And I will not quit until we get an independent investigation by someone outside the province of Saskatchewan. Now, the other two people who are going to speak to us today are Larry Hartwig, when he gets here, and he thought that this press conference was at 1, so he's coming at great speed. And my friend Don Gray, and I was hoping his mother, Alice Larabi, would be here, but unfortunately the weather has prevented her from coming in from Rosetown. So, I called Don when this front page story was printed in the Star Phoenix, and I said, you know, I'm being accused of deliberately being offensive. And I said, if this is going to cause you any issues in the community, you know, don't come. And Don said to me, he said, I am going to be there by your side. And come hell or high water, he was. So I'm very grateful. So he will speak briefly. And Don and his mother were two of the people who knew long before I did that an injustice had occurred here. I had printed my first story about the Saskatoon cops, and there was a big headline on my news magazine, Alberta Report, racist cops, and there was no question mark after it. And I knew everything pointed to it, besides it was the accepted wisdom. I knew they'd done it, and it was only after I had a chance to travel to Saskatoon from Calgary and mainly talk to Aboriginal people, because I thought anybody else could be lying, but you know, the Aboriginal people would tell me the truth, and they all said those cops were the best, and they would no more have hurt someone, an Aboriginal person, than they would have flown to the moon. And I wish Alice could be here, but I will read you something that I got from Lucy Matichuk, who was a resident manager of a very busy apartment complex known as Clancy Village. And she was hoping to come here from Moose Jaw to speak in support of Larry, but she's taken a very intensive course and just couldn't make it. But she asked me to say this, and I quote, "I love Larry. He and I went through a lot together when I was resident manager at Clancy Village Apartments, and Larry was the officer who brought in crime-free multi-housing. We were going into stage 3 when all these allegations started flying. Larry was always helpful and always caring and just there. He has been really treated unfairly. If he was going to do something bad, there would have been signs of it in advance, but there were never any signs of prejudice or abuse with him. And we dealt with some pretty shady characters. You can tell when someone's prejudiced," Lucy concluded. She said, "Larry was genuine. He had nothing but good intentions and was always wanting to help improve things for us." So I wanted to read that to you. I really had to readjust my thinking when I spoke to the people who told me, and police officers and everyone I could talk to, and they all said, "No, there's something very weird going on here." And so I quit my job, and I decided that I would commit to trying to find what on earth went on here. So we will have the presentations, and then we will have some questions and answers from the reporters here, and then we'll have some questions from the people that are live streaming today. So 11 years ago this month, 2 highly regarded officers were fired from the Saskatoon Police Service. Why? Because it was alleged they had Neil Stonechild in their custody and they had lied about it. Why is this significant? Because they had not had Neil Stonechild in their custody, much less engaged in any wrongdoing. In fact, they did not even see Neil Stonechild on the night he went missing and was later found frozen to death. So today, after all this money, after all these investigations, 2 families put through purgatory, and all the pain and all the sorrow in the community, allegations and counter-allegations, we still don't know. And I would sure like to find out what happened to Neil Stonechild that night. Now, as most of you know, Constables Hartwig and Singer had been dispatched to look for Neil after several people in an apartment building phoned 911. Neil was intoxicated and ringing doorbells randomly late at night, looking for an ex-girlfriend, and he was causing a disturbance. So Constables Hartwig and Singer were working together that night for the first time in their lives. Now, if you're going to commit murder, it's really a good idea to know the other person that you're working with and know if they can be trusted, and maybe do a little bit of planning. But that was their second dispatch they'd ever been on together, was to find Neil Stonechild. And I'm a little bit proud of the what I've found, which is that their first dispatch was to find a young man, and he was described as being asleep in a Mustang. And it was a very cold night, and people were concerned for his safety. So they went and they found this man, and they could have given him a criminal sentence for being intoxicated while in the care of a vehicle because the key was in the ignition. They did not. They chose to give this 17-year-old male a break, and they drove him home. So I thought that I would see if I could talk to this fellow, and it really wasn't rocket science, but I tracked him down. And it took me about 10 minutes. I knew he had an unusual name, and I called the the number that I got from 411. He answered. I said, I'm trying to write a book on the Saskatoon police. Can you help me? If I can, he said. I said, did you have a Mustang in 1990? Yes. Was this your birthday? Yes. And this is your name? Yes. Were you living at this address in 1990? No. I said, okay, I'm really sorry. And he said, no, that was my aunt and uncle's house, and I often lived with them there. So I said, do you remember being driven home by police in 1990? No. Could I talk to your aunt and uncle? No, they're both dead. I said, well, you are alive and well, and you are the gentleman that Hartwig and Singer were dispatched to look for. I said, are you by any chance Aboriginal? He said, sure am. So I said, did the RCMP talk to you about this? He said, no. So anyway, I thanked him, and I hung up, and I thought, if the RCMP had found that information, it would have shown that on their very first dispatch ever, Hartwig and Singer were dispatched to look for a 17-year-old intoxicated Aboriginal male. They drove him home. He's alive and well today. If the RCMP had discovered that fact, what they would have said to each other, hopefully, was, whoa, boys, rein yourself in. This seems highly inconsistent behavior that one 17-year-old Aboriginal intoxicated male, they go and they drive him home, and the second 17-year-old Aboriginal male, they drive and beat him up, drive him out to the north of the city, and leave him to die. Now, as Brad said to me, what benefit would we have gained? What would be the point? What would we have gained? He said, I was still on probation as a police officer. I could have been fired with no reason given. And he said, I always wanted to be a police officer from the time I was a little boy. Why would I jeopardize that? Particularly on, the first night I'd ever been with an officer. He said, it defies logic. So Hartwig and Singer drove toward the apartment where they had been told to look for Neil Stonechild, Snowberry Downs. They stopped and they checked two youths on the street on their way looking for Neil. And they talked to two people saying, are you Neil Stonechild? And neither one said they were. They then went to the particular apartment where the ex-girlfriend was babysitting, and they talked to the people there. They told the officers that Neil had left after they told him they had called the cops, and so the officers looked around, could not find Neil, and they wrote GOA in their notebooks, which stands for Gone on Arrival, and went on with their very busy Saturday night. They took 11 dispatches back-to-back in their 8 hours together. That was in 1990. 11 years later, the Mounties disinterred Stonechild's body, and because Constables Hartwig and Singer had been the officers dispatched to look for Stonechild, the RCMP ignored other suspects and other ways for Neil to get out to the industrial area, and they pointed the finger at the officers and said, you guys did this. It did not matter what sort of exculpatory evidence the RCMP turned up. Nothing would deter their investigator from what I and many others believe was a terrible case of tunnel vision. It was like me in my first article. I knew who had done it, and I just put on the blinkers and ignored any evidence to the contrary. And I think that's what happened with the RCMP. One officer, the lead investigator, had this idea in his head, and he went for it. And then the theory that he wrote out was, in my opinion, followed by the commissioner and later by the hearing officer. And the RCMP could not find any evidence to convince Sask Justice to lay a charge, much less secure a conviction against the two officers who by then, 2001, had put in more than a decade of exemplary service. Only one person ever claimed to have seen Neil Stonechild in a police car, and that was Jason Roy. He was one of the two people the officers had stopped and interviewed on the street. Jason Roy did not come forward publicly until 10 years after Neil Stonechild's freezing death, after in 2000, and he came forward with a story that was entirely different than it had been 10 years earlier. 10 years earlier, in a handwritten statement, he had not mentioned any police involvement whatsoever. And his story would continue to change. When Constables Hartwig and Singer had stopped Jason Roy in 1990 and asked who he was, he lied. He gave them a false name. And then, when the Mounties asked later why he had lied about his name, he said it was because he was unlawfully at large from a detention home. That, too, was untrue. At the inquiry, he admitted he lied about when he gave important statements to the police and what was in those statements. For example, he said that in his first statement to police, he had told them he saw Stonechild in a police car. When that first statement was found, Jason had not said anything about seeing Stonechild in a police car. He had not said anything about police at all. It didn't matter whatever evidence turned up. It was as though the RCMP's philosophy was, well, he lied about this and he lied about this and he lied about this, but he wouldn't lie about the police. The RCMP lead investigator on the Stonechild file, Corporal Jack Warner, seemed to swallow Roy's story hook, line, and sinker. And I, along with many others, believe the RCMP and others within the justice system bowed to political pressure from special interest groups, such as the FSIN, Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations, and Amnesty International. And in fact, in my access to information request, which was finally fulfilled several years after I initially made it, I got 2,000 documents, and in there I found an admission of political pressure applied by FSIN chiefs on senior members of the RCMP and on the government. That's in the book. There was no evidence to lead to a charge against Hartwig and Singer so they could have defended themselves in court. No evidence, so Sask Justice then decided to hold a public inquiry. An independent witness that I interviewed believes that after Hartwig and Singer wrote "Gone on Arrival" in their notebooks and went on to other dispatches, she saw someone matching Stonechild's description, walking under his own power. And that woman had fully expected to testify at the public inquiry, but she was not called. Now, I have spoken to her at length, and we went back to the home. What happened was she and there were two couples in a car. They came into a driveway late at night, around midnight, and there was somebody crouched down in the driveway, a few feet from where they parked. And one of the women in the car jumped out and chased after him. He ran away, and she chased after him, and then she came back and called 911. The other woman was sitting in the car, and she got a very good look at him. She said he kind of got caught up in the pointilla bushes that we had planted there. And so while he was struggling to get free, I had a good chance to look at him. And she described the long black hair past shoulder length. She described the clothing, the contrasting color between the open jacket and the shirt underneath, blue jeans, runners, all the things that matched Neil Stonechild's description. Now, she was on O'Regan Crescent, just a few blocks from where Neil Stonechild had last been seen at Snowberry Downs. A few blocks, and this one woman had such a brilliant description of who she had seen. And the other woman was busy chasing after him. She didn't remember what he looked like at all. Who was called to testify at the inquiry? The woman with the memory, the eidetic memory, she's in the insurance industry and she is trained to remember detail, or the woman who told the RCMP, I don't remember anything about how he looked. And she was very clear about that. And the person who was called to testify at the inquiry was the woman who told the RCMP, I don't remember anything about him. I remember chasing after him, and that's it. So I find that very, very strange. The other interesting thing is that the same minute that this woman was calling 911 to say there's a suspicious person in my driveway, Hartwig and Singer were C-picking, checking out on the Canadian Police Information System the information that Jason Roy had given them. So Jason Roy was standing beside the police car at this time when he said he saw Neil Stonechild in the police car, and at that very same minute she was describing somebody that was hiding in her driveway a few blocks this way from Snowberry Downs. I find it very interesting that Stonechild could be in two places, in a police car and possibly in this driveway. Because why was this person hiding? She described him as Aboriginal, long black hair. Why was he hiding if, he hadn't broken into her house, hadn't broken into any other houses? I believe the reason he was hiding was because he knew the police were after him, and he saw lights coming down the street and hid. The other fascinating thing was that when Jason Roy saw he said that he saw Neil Stonechild in a police car here, the police then drove around a concrete median in the middle of the street, and interviewed somebody over here. They were less than a block apart. And this person over here said, "There's nobody in the back seat." He said, "Neil Stonechild was my cousin. I would have recognized him. There was nobody in the back seat." So here's Jason Roy here saying Neil Stonechild is in the police car. They drive out around and talk to this person here, and he says nobody was in the police car. And so where did Neil Stonechild disappear to in that one block? There are so many questions. Then there was Dr. Rao, Dr. Valerie Rao. She was sent, before the inquiry, 44 pictures the police had taken of Neil Stonechild's body in the field. She analyzed them. She was the chief medical examiner of Columbia City, Missouri. And she said those were not handcuffs marks on Neil Stonechild's hand. They weren't in the correct place for handcuffs. There was nothing remotely like handcuffs on his hands. And she wrote this report, and she sent that into the inquiry. She expected to testify. She was not called to testify either. And she is still wondering to this day, why was she not called? She said, there are abuses. Police do commit abuses. She said, I'm dealing on a case like that right now, but this is not one of them. There was no defensive wounds, nothing. And then there was the ambulance attendant, and he told me all this information. He said, I helped the police to bag the hands for evidence. He helped to remove the body from the field. And he said, when I helped the police bag the hands, I pulled the jacket back so they could bag them. And he said, the marks on Neil Stonechild's hand exactly matched the storm cuffs on his jacket when I pulled his sleeve back. And so he told me that. He told me there were just two little scratches on Neil's nose. Those were likely caused by the vegetation. He said they were tiny scratches. There were no defensive wounds on his hands. None of his clothing was ripped. There was no blood anywhere, not in the snow, not on his clothes. And so he told me all these things. Then, after I got the access to information material, I found the notes that the Mounties written about this, and I thought, well, they didn't say anything about the marks matching the cuffs on the jacket. They didn't say anything about the two little scratches on his nose. And I phoned the ambulance attendant back and I said, are you sure you told the RCMP that? Yes, I did. I talked to them for 2.5 hours. I drew them a picture of the body in the field and what direction it was in. I said they didn't mention that you drew a picture. They said in their notes that you didn't remember what day it was and how cold it was. You just said it was very cold. It was as though they were trying to discredit your testimony. And that ambulance attendant had fully intended to come to the inquiry and testify. He had expected to, and he wasn't called. Now, the inquiry commissioner wrote a devastating report implicating the officers in the death. Many in the legal community believe it was far outside the scope of the inquiry for the commissioner to decide whether or not the officers had Stonechild in their custody, and the commissioner effectively imposed criminal or civil responsibility for his death without having the evidence and without having the grounds to charge, because if the commissioner had found the evidence, charges would have been laid. And my final point is that another fact not previously made public is that after the inquiry, the Police Association was asking questions about the RCMP investigator Jack Warner withholding important information from the Stonechild investigation file. However, before the association could lay a formal complaint against Warner for this serious breach, RCMP Officer Warner retired suddenly from the Mounties. He quit and he went to work for the Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations. About that information that had apparently been withheld from the RCMP investigation file, Police Association Stan Gertson said, "I was troubled with the thought that any evidence that was contrary to the findings of the Stonechild Inquiry report might have been excluded from an open police file. This concerned me," Gertson says, "because if it was the result of neglect or laziness by the RCMP, that was troubling. But if the evidence was withheld from the file intentionally, then it was potentially a much more serious matter." Now, the issue of Aboriginal people freezing to death does need to be addressed, but it's not going to be addressed by scapegoating innocent people. And as an investigative journalist, after a decade spent studying the cold, hard facts, I find much about the Stonechild case troubling and potentially much more serious. A grievous miscarriage of justice has occurred, and I, along with others, will not rest until the case against Larry Hartwig and Brad Singer is reinvestigated by a completely independent agency. Thank you. Now, I would like Don to give us a few words, and then Larry will speak.
Hello, my name is Donald Gray. I'm a friend of Candis's, and I lived here in the city, grew up here in the city. I'm an Aboriginal male. Back in '90, I was on and off on the streets. Not once did I have any problems with police, anything like that. Like, they're more out there to help me. They try telling me different places I can go to get help with my family, like family problems, my problems. And I never heard of any abuse towards Natives or any other person for that fact, but mainly like myself, I never had one problem with officers except when I got in trouble. So
Except who?
when I got in trouble. But growing up in the city, I always felt protected. Didn't have to worry about nothing. If I needed help, it was there. And now I come back, I'm doing better than what I've been doing. So I really don't know much about this, but never heard of it, like what happened with Neil. Never heard of the Starlight Tour until just recently. Never thought about anything to do with that, but I'm more here for support for Candis and Larry and dealing with what's been going on. I don't know much more to say. I just wanted to say that in that time frame, I never had problems with cops or officers in any form. So
you've obviously acknowledged that there's people that are upset about the book's release and the launch date and the timing surrounding it. Mm-hmm. How would you not know, given that you've had a close personal relationship with Mr. Hartwig and the timing of the events?
Mm-hmm. Well, I thought I explained that at quite length. Nobody knows when Neil died. The pathologist assigned the date of death as November the 27th. I fully acknowledge I goofed. I fully acknowledge that I'm apologizing if I offended anybody, but there was nothing intentional.
There's allegations that you launched the book around this time of year.
I launched it because November the 12th was the date that these officers were fired 11 years ago. So that was when it was supposed to have been launched, November the 12th.
How do you respond then to allegations that you did it to drum up attention?
No, they're wrong.
Repeat your question.
The question was, how do you respond to allegations that I had launched it to drum up attention? No, I launched it because of the firing date of November the 12th. These were good officers. They were never charged with anything. They should not have been fired.
Some friends have said, why even write the book at all?
Because it needed to be written. I'll tell you my take on what's been going on here. I think whenever I would have launched this book, people would have found some reason to protest. Why? To silence me. I will not be silenced.
You mentioned already that there were people who weren't called to speak during the public inquiry. You mentioned evidence that you think what didn't come forward, and you did describe your explanation at length. But why would that happen? Why do you think that
Okay.
could have happened?
Yeah, why do I think? Because that has been a very good question that I have been asking myself. How could this possibly have happened? And that is one of the things that kept me pursuing this all this time, was how did they manage to do this? And I think the answer is tunnel vision. If you begin with the idea that somebody is guilty, you blind yourself to anything, any exculpatory evidence, anything that would show the police couldn't possibly have done this. You just turn off your all your senses. I've done that. I did it once in a news story. And it was very public embarrassment because I knew who had been responsible for the crime, and I was given other information, hints of it, but I didn't hear it. So the Department of Justice acknowledges that is one of the most frequent form of false convictions is tunnel vision. And I believe that's what it was. Everybody just knew that police were doing this all the time, which was completely untrue, as Dawn testified to.
And it is the job of these public inquiries to listen to evidence and to make recommendations, and for a jury to, make recommendations and those to be implemented. Why do you think you said that the commissioner overstepped their?
Because you're specifically told as a commissioner that you have a fine line to walk. If you implicate someone in a crime, they have no legal avenue to appeal your decision. So you are specifically prescribed against finding anyone or making it appear that someone was involved in a crime. And the commissioner said, I find that, I'm trying to remember this accurately, that Neil Stonechild was probably last seen in a police car, and that the police could have had time to drop Neil off, going through two completely separate police districts, in which the police would have said to him there, what are you doing in our district? What are you doing in our district? Plus their sergeant would have been not too happy with them. Why would they do that the first time they've ever worked together? So the commissioner, I believe, vastly overstepped what he was supposed to do. He was supposed to be an airing for the community to heal, and the police didn't heal, the community didn't heal, Neil Stonechild's mother didn't heal, and all these years later, we still need to find out a lot of questions.
And you talk about the medical officer from Missouri, Dr. Valerie Rao. Why was she the medical officer?
She was a medical officer for Columbia, but the information was sent to her because she analyzed a lot of police abuse and that sort of thing. So she was asked to do a report and find, what do you find from these photographs? Was there signs of handcuff marks? Was there signs of handcuff marks on the nose? Well, the lines on the nose actually weren't even parallel. You can see in the pictures in my book. So she was consulted and sent in this report saying, no, sorry, there's no police abuse here, and she was not called to testify.
What about the medical examiner that saw, Neil Stonechild's body? Mm-hmm. Where's her sort of take on all of this?
Well, they're all in agreement. Everybody in Saskatoon said there was no foul play. This is an accidental death.
And you talked about how you don't want to stop until it's reinvestigated in a completely independent agency. How do you envision that? What kind of agency do you want to see?
I wish I could answer your question. Larry would be a better person to ask. He's more knowledgeable about that area.
What do you think about the other cases of frozen bodies sort of around that time in Saskatoon?
I know. It was a perfect storm. That was the thing. That's what convinced me that it was obviously police. I deal with the freezing deaths of Wigner and Nastus in the book in quite a bit of depth. And the public inquests, the coroner's inquests that were held into those deaths, there was never found to be any police involvement whatsoever. Larry, are you ready to speak?
I'm more than ready.
Okay, by all means.
Thank you. Okay, I'm really short, and this computer is really tall. Well, hang on, that might work. I want to thank you for this opportunity of coming here today. This is the first time that I've had an opportunity to actually speak to the media and not to be restricted in the way the things that I say in this regard. Okay, but first there are a few people I'd like to thank. There have been a number of people who have defended, supported, and sustained me over the last 15 years of uncertainty, anguish, and suffering. First, I'd like to thank my wife who has supported and sustained me even though this has been as hard on her as it has been on me. She is truly a saint. I thank my children for being patient and supporting during the times that I could not be there for them when they were growing up. I thank the rank and file members of the SPS who have fought with me in an attempt to clear my name and restore my reputation. I want to especially thank the members of the Saskatoon Police Association, past and present, as well as provincial police representatives who have literally put their lives on hold and their health at risk to fight with me. Finally, I'd like to thank Candis Mclean, who's fought for years to bring these issues to light. She too has put her life and health on hold and health at risk to expose the facts that justice officials and many journalists would like to remain hidden. The fight is not over, it's only beginning. Let's remember where this all started. This all started with Jason Roy telling a very convincing lie while he was very intoxicated. Today it continues as a bigger lie, a lie that has fooled many people. It started with Jason Roy telling others that he did not remember what happened that night. It started with him providing a statement on November 30th, 1990, where he stated 3 times he did not remember what happened that night. The only statement, by the way, where he told the truth. A statement that he would claim 10 years later was a lie. A number of examples can be provided where the RCMP ignored evidence that Jason Roy made up this whole story and where they made very few meaningful inquiries in order to find the facts of these matters. A number of examples can be provided where evidence was manipulated and excluded, apparently in order to establish Jason Roy's credibility. For Jason Roy to establish guilt on my part and the part of the other police officers involved in this case. There's even explanations of why they did it. The RCMP spent 3 years investigating this case and getting nowhere. Yet I can explain in just a few minutes how Jason Roy's allegation of me having arrested Neil Stonechild that night is all but impossible to have occurred. This 7-minute time period was ignored by the RCMP, by the justice officials acting on this case. The real and tangible evidence in this case has not changed. It remains the same now as always. The thing is that anything can become possible once those acting on behalf of justice exclude real and tangible evidence. The fact is, I did not encounter Neil Stonechild that night. I did not arrest him. I most certainly did not beat him up or drive him anywhere. The RCMP tried desperately to convince me that I did in fact encounter Neil Stonechild that night. At one time, I acknowledged that this was a possibility because the RCMP insisted it was true. They merely tried to establish the issue of custody, but that too is meaningless unless you first assume that Jason Roy was telling the truth. They focused on the wrong issue. A public inquiry was held. A public inquiry is not a trial, nor is it ever to be used as one. A person has no ability to call evidence, no ability to defend oneself, and the normal rules of evidence do not apply. The public inquiry heard from Jason Roy, who acknowledged that his memories of these events are bad at best. Jason Roy testified that he had lied several times in his previous disclosures and could not explain why. He was just as sincere in telling these admitted lies as he was when speaking about his later allegation that police had Neil in custody. At the public inquiry, the conduct of the investigators in this case was raised twice. The Commission of Inquiry recognized that the allegations of investigative misconduct would affect the integrity and the credibility of the RCMP, their investigation, and the public inquiry as well. The two lead RCMP investigators and the RCMP trained commission investigator who engaged in this alleged misconduct were scheduled to testify and to be examined under oath. They were excluded, and this misconduct was ignored. In their place, the administrative supervisor testified. In the end, he admitted that the RCMP did everything they could do to determine why Neil Stonechild died and how he came to be in the North End, and he admitted that they were unable to answer those questions. He confirmed that there was no evidence of misconduct by any Saskatoon police officer in regards to the death of Neil Stonechild. The public inquiry even heard from lawyers representing Jason Roy and the Stonechild family, introducing evidence that the marks on Neil Stonechild were caused by an object other than handcuffs. The expert witness used by the RCMP stated he could not possibly describe or demonstrate how the marks were made because it was all hypothetical. This is all part of the public record, by the way. You should be aware of this. If you're not, then I don't know what to say. The public inquiry validated the suspicions of the RCMP, and I was essentially blamed for Neil's death. The problem is that some of these conclusions are so outrageous that 3 different people would have to be in 2 different places at the same time more than once. It would mean that time would have to literally be altered. It would mean that normal human physiology would have to be radically changed. I was fired in disgrace based on these conclusions and by a police chief who rejected the evidence produced on behalf of the Saskatoon Police Service. He rejected the legal advice of the city solicitor and went out and sought his own personal legal counsel. Why? Because, as one journalist said, I was made to pay for the sins of white police officers. I believe this public inquiry was used to validate the existence of these claims and perceptions that police were killing Aboriginal people in order to appease certain groups. This case undermines everything our justice system is supposed to stand for and represent. This is a case where it's clear that the substance of justice can be sacrificed in order to provide an illusion of justice, in order to satisfy some perverse sense of the greater good. This is the worst kind of oppression. Instead, we've been placed in legal limbo for 11 years. During this time, we've fought continuously to bring these issues to light, only to be stymied and stonewalled. I have been recently told that it is not in the public interest to pursue these matters and that it really wasn't a big deal because I wasn't charged with anything. I can tell you with all seriousness, I wish I were charged with a criminal offense. At least then I would have had the presumption of innocence, I would have had a means to defend myself, and this would have been all over a long time ago. I would have been able to be vindicated and start rebuilding my life. The reckless and irresponsible actions taken by some journalists and some of those acting on behalf of justice have destroyed my life and everything I believed in. My life has become a nightmare without end. It has a similar effect on my family members as well. It has damaged or destroyed our hopes, our dreams, our plans for the future, our relationships with each other. The decisions made by those who have chosen not to act in these matters have deprived me of any means of proving my innocence, as if I had to do that in the first place. It has kept us from seeking justice and healing. And that, too, is only the beginning of the story. There have been new evidence that I've learned about last year that I'm still trying to confirm, that yet another significant portion of Jason Roy's allegation is a lie. I'm aware of those who have tried to tell the truth in these matters only to have their evidence rejected. I am aware of those in the community who have evidence that Jason Roy made this all up. I am asking those people to come forward with that information so that I might have some peace and begin to heal. And yet I'm not the only victim in this case. I am only one of many. Still far more adversely affected by the justice system that will allow corruption to infect this institution that is supposed to be one of the foundational pillars of a free and democratic society. Thanks for listening.
So,
Who do you represent?
oh, sorry, I'm Sarah Plowman with CTV News.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Thank you for being here as well, and thank you for your questions.
Thanks. So on November 24th, 1990, the night in question, you say in order for, what were you actually doing then?
That's all part of the public record.
Could you just give us a summary?
Are you asking me to explain what happened in this matter and how Jason Roy's allegation cannot be true? Is that what you're asking me?
Yes.
Okay. Does everybody want to hear that answer?
Sure, please.
Can we have, is it, guys? Okay, thank you. This is a topic that I wanted to bring up for 15 years. Okay, here's the timeline. This is the complete timeline, not the timeline that the RCMP presented to SAS Justice. The timeline that the RCMP provided for SAS Justice is incomplete, and I believe willfully so. Neil and Jason were drinking at a party that night. They had consumed the better part of 20 ounces of vodka each. Neil decided to go look for an old girlfriend at Snowberry Downs, a girlfriend that he still had feelings for, and the girlfriend that was with her new boyfriend that night. Neil and Jason went to 3 different apartment buildings looking for the girl. They caused a disturbance. At 11:49 p.m., Trent Ewart called the Saskatoon Police Service to report that Neil Stonechild was drunk and causing problems at his apartment at 306, 3308, 33rd Street West. Other residents complained as well. The call was made up, and Brad and I were dispatched at 11:51 p.m. Okay? I knew Neil at that time. I knew where he lived. I knew his brothers. I knew his mom. We started looking for Neil Stonechild at his residence and started working our way towards Snowberry Downs to try to intercept him. At 11:56, while en route to the call, we see a young male walking from Snowberry Downs towards Stonechild's residence. We decided to check him. We pressed at scene, even though we were still 3 blocks away from Snowberry Downs. That person was Jason Roy, who lied about who he was. He provided the name Tracy Lee Horse. He was CPIC twice at 11:56, and I have his name written down in my notebook. We spoke, let me just catch up here. So that's where Jason Roy first lied. Okay, he provided the name of his cousin's Tracy Lee Horse. He lied because he was just involved in that disturbance at Snowberry Downs. While we were present with Jason Roy, we queried the name of Neil Stonechild. This is a routine process for every police officer to do, because when you query the name of your subject, you are already aware of certain conditions, if there are any, such as a warrant such as court-ordered conditions that the person must abide by. We do that as a matter of routine at every call we take. We queried Neil Stonechild by approximate age only. We queried the alias Jason Roy provided by date of birth. This is significant because if a person is not present to provide that information, we have to guess. Okay? This is further, the RCMP, by the way, used this as evidence that Neil Stonechild was in custody, but I can tell you that the RCMP were also aware that Neil Stonechild was queried the exact same way 5 different times after his death up to and including March 1991. He was also queried by date of birth by Court and Central Records staff. So, using the logic of everybody involved in this case, Neil Stonechild must have been present while he was dead. This is the evidence that these people hung their case on. Okay, so we check Jason Roy. At 12:04, a block closer, we check Bruce Chennai, who happens to be Neil Stonechild's own cousin. We query him. He said he was checked 5 to 10 minutes in length. From there, we went to Snowberry Downs. We made contact with Trent Ewart, who was the complainant in this case. At 12:18, we cleared the call. Now, do you want me to explain why Jason Roy's allegation is impossible to have occurred? And it comes down as simple as this. How could we have Neil Stonechild in custody at the very same minute we arrived to the scene? 3 blocks from Snowberry Downs. Can any of you answer that question?
Why do you think you haven't been believed up until this point?
Can any of you answer that question? I'll answer your question if you answer mine. Right.
You can.
Nobody has answered that question. Not the RCMP, not the commissioner, no one. First point, we know we attended the scene and spoke to Trent Ewart. It's been confirmed by Gary Horse and Trent Ewart himself. The RCMP ignored this. Why is this significant? Because if we were to have arrested Neil Stonechild and encountered him and arrested him, we would have had to have done the following. And I want you to evaluate this evidence, okay? Because no one else has. Imagine you're a police officer attending the scene. You leave your patrol car, you walk up to the security doors of an apartment. You buzz the apartment, you're admitted in. You climb 3 flights of stairs, you make contact with the complainant. You get the details of the complaint, you walk back down those 3 flights of stairs and return to your patrol car. How long would that take? And I want a number. Give me a guess, just a guess. Anyone?
20 minutes.
Very nice. Most people say 15, okay? Very nice. So, in order for us to have had Neil in custody, we would then have to have left the apartment. We'd have to look for, find, beat up Neil Stonechild and put him in our patrol car. How long would that take? Now, that's granted a little more hard to nail down. You've answered, you had the courage to answer, give me another answer.
I've never beat anyone up, I wouldn't know.
Yeah, either have I. But, 5 minutes, let's say?
Sure.
Would you say 5 minutes? Can we agree on those figures? People, it's not a time to be timid. Can we agree? Okay.
Let's agree.
Thank you. It's a 2.5-minute driving time from Snowberry Downs to where Jason Roy claimed to have seen Neil Stonechild in the back of my patrol car. 2.5 minutes by the most direct route to be orientated in the lane where Jason Roy claims he saw Neil Stonechild in custody. The evidence is very clear. We were in that lane and we checked Jason Roy that night. So we have 15 to 20 minutes to attend the scene. We have a further 5 minutes to arrest, beat up Neil Stonechild. We have a further 2.5 minutes of driving time. Okay? It's not hard to figure out. For Jason Roy's allegation to be true, all of this would have had to have occurred in less than 7 minutes. The time between he created the disturbance at Snowberry Downs and the time that 11:56, where Jason Roy said Neil had in custody. And that is only assuming that we arrived at the scene at the very same minute Neil caused the disturbance. And that's not what the evidence says. The evidence says we arrived at 11:56 p.m. Does this surprise or shock you? Does this cause you to think? Because I can guarantee it, nobody else thought of this. And the RCMP spent 3 years investigating this case. We've spent millions of dollars in a public inquiry that came up with no answers. The public inquiry where the RCMP themselves admitted there was no evidence of wrongdoing by my part or any other police officer involved in this case. If you want, I can point to the specific testimony where these things are. All part of the public record, all things that haven't been reported by journalists. Why? That's something you guys have to have the courage to ask.
What do you want the public to know about you today?
What the public knows, the people who know me know how absolutely absurd this allegation is. I can point you to my service record where my last supervisor in platoon told me that he was proud to be a police officer because of me and my conduct. He was proud to be part of my team. That's the reputation I had as a police officer. So if these things can be concocted and lies can be told ad nauseum by journalists, so much to delude the public, and if our justice officials and those acting on behalf of justice can subvert the justice system to allow for the punishment of an innocent person based on a mere allegation of a perceived offense, how safe are you?
You say you've been.
Just hang on. I want an answer. How safe are you?
Not very safe if
Right.
you're an officer.
If I'm telling the truth, right? If I'm telling the truth here, right? Don't believe me. Please don't believe me. Read the book. And this book is only the tip of the iceberg.
You say you've been in legal limbo. You say you wish you'd been charged so that you could be vindicated. What do you mean by that? Have you been asking to take this to court?
I wanted to be charged with an offense. In fact, I even challenged Russ Sable when he fired me. I challenged him to charge me with perjury. Nobody will take me up on it. If I've been put in a legal no man's land. This is why public inquiries are not to be used as a substitute for a trial. I have no ability to call evidence. I have no ability to defend myself. I have no mechanism to bring this evidence forward. I've been denied those opportunities to do that under the law. That's why a public inquiry is not a trial. A public inquiry can quite literally, and this was brought up at the public inquiry, it can be literally manipulated so that's a free-for-all.
If you could say anything to Jason Roy today, what would that be?
I would say tell the truth. I would say tell the truth. This is a very, very disturbed and ill young man. He always has been. He always will be. Jason Roy is the product of the choices made by him, for him, and by him. There are people, and I know there are people because I know the names of people who have come forward and said that Jason Roy lied and why he lied. They're just not willing to speak about it publicly. Just as the journalist who interviewed me and said that I was sacrificed for the sins of white police officers, is not willing to come forward publicly.
Tell me about your lowest low over the last couple of years.
Last 15 years?
Sure.
No, I will not disclose that. That
How
is
has this-
deeply personal.
Okay, how has this damaged you? You mentioned that in your speech, that it's damaged you and your family. How so?
Again, that is deeply personal. If you want to talk about that to me personally, I will disclose some of those details for you. But I don't think this is the time. Ask the questions of how this could have possibly occurred. Ask yourself if the process was fair. The personal issues, yeah, it's destroyed my life. It's destroyed my hopes and dreams. It's destroyed the hopes and dreams of my children. I lost the relationship with one of my children over this. It's destroyed, you want to get real personal? It's destroyed my soul.
Why are you the fall guy in this?
Somebody had to take the blame for a freezing death. All the previous investigations did not yield any evidence of police misconduct. Coroner's inquests, the Commission on First Nations and Métis Justice Reform even, did not reveal any misconduct by police officers. I can point you directly to Willie Littlechild's interview with Costa Marigas, where he confirmed that. This was the last kick at the cat to hold somebody responsible. And what has it done? It has demonstrated that police officers cannot trust the justice system to work. It has opened the door for many other similar allegations that have been proved to be bogus. This case was even used as evidence in a disciplinary proceedings in another province because people assumed it was true.
Are you more upset at being fired or the findings of that independent inquiry or that public inquiry?
I'm upset that our police officers and our justice system is allowed to manipulate the law to achieve a predetermined outcome. Are you asking me if I'm upset with Jason Roy? Is that really your question?
No, I asked if you were
Okay.
more upset about
Good.
losing your job or the inquiry.
I'm upset. I lost my job because of the inquiry. I'm upset because the public inquiry was a mechanism to achieve a desired outcome. I can provide you with the evidence. It's all part of the public record. And again, if you're not aware of that, there's something wrong with the information that's coming out of the public inquiry and reported by journalists to the public.
I asked the question earlier, and she suggested that I ask you, you want it to be reinvestigated by a completely independent agency. Could
Right.
you tell me what that might look like? What's your vision?
We've been trying to get this case. First of all, we tried to get this case, the public inquiry, held out of the province in the first place because of all the media attention, all of the misinformation provided. We believe that we could not get a fair process under the law. Okay? Since David Wright's findings, we have filed appeal after appeal after appeal after appeal. Within each one of those appeals, I filed more appeals trying to bring evidence forward. Okay? But we've been told you cannot bring evidence forward that was already available at the time and that other people ignored. Okay? You can't do that. It has to be brand spanking new evidence. It has to be significant enough to change the course of the outcome. From what I understand, there is a body of retired police officers and a retired judge in Alberta that handles these types of cases. But SAS Justice will not allow it to proceed. SAS Justice has refused to investigate my complaints of criminal misconduct against some of those involved.
Why has the other fellow officer involved not participated? I know you probably don't want to speak on his behalf, but why is that the case?
I can touch on that. It was far different for him than it was for me. And that's all I'm going to say, because it would reveal certain ways that this has harmed me versus the certain ways that it affected us differently.
And why have you waited until now to speak?
Very good question. Very good. Thank you. I haven't waited this long to speak. I've been speaking about these matters, and some of those guys in the back of the room can tell you that I've been speaking about these matters since May 18th, 2000. Nobody listened. I was told that let's put it this way, I'm gonna choose my words a little more carefully. Those who supported me have begged me not to speak up, okay? Because they were involved in very delicate negotiations with provincial authorities to bring this issue forward in a judicial process where all of the evidence would be evaluated in a fair and unbiased way, okay? As of earlier this month, that process came to a close. That's how long this has taken. That's how long I've been waiting to tell my story.
And is the closure because of what you said before, that they wouldn't allow you to bring evidence forward that existed before but just wasn't presented?
No, the final decision was made not to proceed with the criminal charges as I have alleged. A complaint that I filed in the spring of 2011, by the way.
Why should people believe you now?
Don't. My answer is don't. Look at the evidence. Don't believe me. I don't care if you do or don't. Look at the evidence and then decide. And again, this is only scratching the surface.
How would you respond to the allegations that the book launch was set so that...
I can answer that question. Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
I can answer that question. Candis has been writing this book. It was supposed to have been done in 2008. This is how long she has been struggling to get this book published. Publishers, time and time again, have turned Candis down. They've turned me down in writing a book myself, because that is what I wanted to do as well. I wanted to write a book about policing. Why policing? What works in policing? What works in justice? What doesn't work in justice? But nobody wants to hear from a dirty cop, do they? This book launch was, Candis had picked November 12th, the day I was fired, as the book launch release. And it was only because she finally got some cooperation from those people she was working with or trying to work with to publish the book. It was delayed a couple of weeks because of unforeseen circumstances. The fact that this is, I never thought about this being the 25th anniversary of Neil's death. If I would have thought about that, I would have suggested to Candis that we delay it. Nobody thought of it.
Do you get any money from the book sales?
No, absolutely not. I don't want any money, although this has destroyed us financially as well. I will never be able to retire. My wife can't retire because of the loss of income in this case. I can even tell you more things about that, but I won't at this point in time because it jeopardizes me. This isn't about money. This is about integrity. This is about truth. It is not meant to hurt anybody. It is not meant to offend anyone. The focus of this book is not on the Aboriginal community. This is not an Aboriginal issue. Not by any stretch of the imagination. This is about the integrity of the justice system. It's not even about Jason Roy lying. Jason Roy, again, is an ill man. Jason Roy does what Jason Roy does.
What have you been doing since you were fired from the SPS? How have you been making a living, and what has been...
That I will not talk about. Any other questions?
Not from us, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your questions. Oh, by the way, if you're interested in going on a tour of these events and actually seeing how impossible it is to occur, that can be arranged as well. You can see it for yourself. It's pretty hard to conceptualize these ideas based on times alone unless you have the actual physical locations in mind. Thank you.
And I just wish to say that you missed the introduction here where I was explaining my logic. It had nothing to do with my wonderful publisher who is live streaming this event. It had to do with the timing of availability at the bookstore.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. I just want to conclude just by saying if this injustice could happen to two cops with exemplary records, the rest of us should be very, very afraid. So now, Julie, did you have any questions from people that were live streaming? Hang on, Julie, we're just going to unmute you. Okay. Yes, Julie. What questions do you have?
Can you hear me okay?
Everything's wonderful?
We don't have any burning questions right now, Candis.
Okay.
We're encouraging you to go ahead and with your interviews or any other questions
Okay.
From the press.
Okay, that's good. I just wanted to say one thing, which is if anybody's interested in that timeline that some of these gentlemen at the back of the room have been working on very hard. Retired officers worked for many weeks to figure out this timeline. And it's on my website, www.whenpolicebecomepray.com. And you can look at that website and study it because they analyze minute by minute where Larry Hartwig was and where Brad Singer was, and then when they partnered up 10 or so at night and what they did and where they went. So all of that is available on my website.
Okay, thank you, Candis.
Good. No more.
Any more questions from the floor?
Any more questions from the floor? No. I think we're done. Thanks, Julie.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Candis.
Appreciate it.
And this recording will be available soon, and we'll make sure that the link is on your website so that for those that missed the whole interview are
Okay.
able to listen to the full recording.
Wonderful. Thank you. So what Julie was saying is that the recording will be available on the website. So if you want to go back and listen to something again, it'll all be on the website. Thanks, Julie.